Well, hi, everyone. This is Rob O'Friel here again, talking about my favorite subject, music. And who better to talk about music with than somebody who has been around and seen a lot of music that you've been around and heard and seen in your life. If you've been to a concert in Pittsburgh, the man that I'm with here, Ed Traversari, is probably responsible in some way, shape, or form for having made that happen. And concerts, Ed, for many of us, as we're seeing people posting on Facebook, people just love to relive the concert memories. We don't have any future memories to think about right now, so a lot of us are going back and saying, well, let's relive the times we had at the arena and the mosque. And I thought, who better to talk about some of that with than you, Ed Traversari. So welcome and thanks for your time.
Oh, sure, no problem. I'd love to do it for you, man.
Thanks. And you're, we're social distancing, just so people know. As you can probably tell, we're in separate rooms, and we're doing our part to stay safe and keep everybody else safe. So Ed, just for those, a lot of us know you, especially if you're in my age group. You were the internet back in the day. You were Facebook when there was a concert announcement coming out. I used to, the radio would tease us that, hey, tomorrow Ed's coming in to make an announcement at 3 o'clock. So that's 26 hours from now. I can't wait that long. So you were the Facebook.
Oh, it turned into that. I mean, I never asked for that. I mean, if I could just tell you quickly how that got started, back in the day in the concerts, I mean, I've been doing it since 1975, to be honest with you. That's when I come out of college. And just a quick background, I was lucky. Rich Engler took me under his wing. We were both drummers. I think we had something in common. I came out of the school as an entertainment coordinator of the concerts on the campus of Robert Morris back in the mid-'70s. And I think he liked that. He was a solo person working in North Hills at the time doing the concerts because he had joined Pat DiCesare in 1973, made DiCesare Engler come together. And so this was only 2 years later. At that time, he was running the whole operation, and Pat was taking a little bit of a back seat. And anyways, he, upon a conversation out of school, he hired me. And, he says, look, I'm going to teach you everything. I says, man, teach me all of it. I want to know everything there is, because I was a musician, and I went to college for a business degree, but because there was no music schools or no schools for music business. There were, of course, music schools, but I wasn't that good. Anyways, he said he'd teach me everything. So I started off as a production manager, took care of all the backstage stuff for the bands. And then eventually I got into marketing. And he said, you want to learn how to market? I go, yeah, I want to do everything. So anyways, I was doing marketing, but back in those days, we would normally just go on sale with the show kind of casually. I'd write the commercials, because we could write our own spots back then, put our own music in, and then just say tickets are on sale now, and one day over actually at WDVE, the program director called me into his office one day, and we'd done a lot of business with DVE back then because they were our bread and butter for the music that we did, Anyways, he called me in and he said, listen, I got a new idea. And I go, like, what is it? He goes, have you ever been on radio? I said, no, not really. He says, well, I'm going to make you a big deal. And I said, well, okay, I can be used to be a big deal. And he said, you know how you just normally buy commercials and you start advertising and we help you promote and give tickets away? I said, yeah, it's been working great. He says, well, we're going to play this up and say that you're going to be here on, Friday at 5 or Thursday at 4. And we are going to promote that for like a week. And I said, are you serious? Who in the heck wants to hear me come on and talk about, what am I going to talk about? He says, all the information about the show. He says, you'll keep all that information quiet. And of course, there was no social media. When it's going on sale, what the prices are, who the opening acts are, how many trucks are going to come, what's the power, all this stuff. And that's basically how it started. He said, you're going to do it with the guy named Hirsch. And Hirsch used to be on in the afternoons back, the afternoon drive, or Herschel. And I probably knew Hirsch a little bit because I knew the people at DVE just because I saw them backstage, and I was over at the station. But we started that, and I'll bet you I did it for about 20 years because I went through all of Hirsch, and then I went through basically all of Sean until I left. And then, of course, he just recently left. But when he picked up after Hirsch left off, the program director had long gone. And the new guy said, look, we don't let a lot of people come on the air because they don't do it right. He goes, but, you know, and I said, okay, well, how do I do it? He goes, no, you get in there, you do what you're supposed to do, and we're going to let you keep doing it. And I know that, you know, radio has always been a little bit difficult for the non-DJ to come on and talk because sometimes they go on forever and a lot of ahs. And I just learned from Hirsch and a bunch of other people how to hopefully do it better. And I had a lot of practice. So that's basically, you know, I would have friends who tell me, hey, I was listening to you talk about, you know, Def Leppard. I couldn't wait to hear about it. I go, man, you must have a boring life to wait to hear me talk about Def Leppard.
Oh,
That's how it all started. And I kept it up all through the days until I left Live Nation. And nowadays I don't think they hardly do that anymore because it just doesn't work for what they want. Plus social media doesn't allow you to keep a secret anymore.
yeah. How hard was it back in that day? You must have had some friends coming out of the woodwork, even though we didn't have cell phones then. Hey, this is your long lost brother. You got to tell me who this big announcement is. How hard was it? What was the biggest offer you ever got? What was the biggest offer you ever got to divulge?
Yeah. You know what? I never got anything. My friends were so weird that they would not only want to know the band, but they wanted good seats all the time. Like I was owing them this all the time. And then we'd get on the phone and I'd be like, I remember you from high school, but we weren't that, I'm thinking to myself, we weren't that great of friends. He'd go, now, you know, Ed, I'll pay for the tickets. And I'm thinking, well, of course you'll pay for the tickets. Why wouldn't you pay for them? But I want good seats, you know, but anyways, I learned to live with that. You know, people often said to me, why do you deal with that? I said, you know, I just accepted it. I'm just glad that I got a chance to do in my years from 75 to about 2007 when I left to go to Point Park University. Those were the best years because I never thought that I would ever work for a concert company, even though I had wanted to do that when I was in high school and I was going to see all of Pat DiCesare's Shower Stars and Rich Engler's early concerts. And then when I went to college and I got into it, I thought that was just going to be my passion and I would have to go get a job that I hated, which is what a lot of people do. And I would go to concerts on weekends and nights because I could afford it. And I was so fortunate when I graduated from school. Actually, I got a job for 6 months that I wasn't excited about, but I figured, well, I got to start that job and, you know, don't like it. And during that period, I had just gotten married and Rich Engler ran an ad in the Sunday newspaper, which was a big deal back then. Mm-hmm. Pittsburgh Press, if you wanted to get an ad for a job. Anyways, and he was looking for a runner. And I said to my wife, oh my God, the name of that company, DiCesare Engler's on every one of our tickets. I don't know who those guys are, but this guy Engler wants to hire somebody. So I called him. I had to call him from my other job because he wanted to talk during the day and of course no cell phones, right? So my boss is like at the end of the counter as a retail store. And anyways, I'll never forget, I got on the phone with Rich and he's, you know, he said, hey, you know, I've fired a lot of people recently. I said, oh, really? Why? He said, well, nobody takes this job serious. He said, this is a multi-million-dollar business. And when I hire people, they think they're going to come backstage and hang out with the band and take pictures and get autographs. And I fire them as soon as I see them doing it. And I told him I wouldn't do that. And he said, why wouldn't you do that? I said, well, I'm a drummer in a band. I still play. I said, I produce shows at Robert Morris. And I said, the promoter, aren't they the ones that protect the bands from the crazy crowd? And he goes, well, yeah. He says, I kind of like what you're saying. Call me tomorrow. So I called him the next day. First thing he said to me was, I changed my mind. I'm not hiring anybody. And I was so floored. He loves this story when I tell it, by the way, because we're still, you know, great friends. And I totally remember every second of it. And he said, no, I decided not to. And I don't reason why I don't remember, because he was just running the operation by himself pre-concert. And on the day of the show, he would bring staff in, you know, ticket takers, ushers, and all that. Well, he got real quiet on the phone, and I spoke up. I said, I'll work for free. He said, what time can you come to my office? And he hired me to start working that next day. And I said, well, aren't I supposed to give my boss 2 weeks? He goes, you don't have 2 weeks. I need you tomorrow. I said, well, okay. So I quit just like that. And I said, what am I going to do? He said, do you ever drive a Rolls Royce? I says, I haven't even seen many Rolls Royces. He says, well, you come to my house tonight. You're going to practice driving my Rolls Royce that we own because we pick up the bands in the 70s in a Rolls Royce. And I said, and I'm going to drive it? And he said, yeah, you're going to drive it. So that's what I did. I said, well, by the way, who am I picking up tomorrow? Now, you have to understand something, Rob. Thinking of he had told me he had fired all these people because they were so into the band. He hits me with a band that was one of my favorite. In fact, they were on my top 10 records. I just did my albums when I was in college because I took my drums and put them away and got the acoustic guitar out. And America was a band I really liked. And I played all the America songs with my buddies. And then he goes, you're picking up America tomorrow at the airport and taking them to the mosque in Oakland. I thought, I am going to be the rudest driver you've ever had because I'm not talking to them because I don't want to get fired. And that was my first day.
Did they put the window up like in Spinal Tap when you started to try to talk to them?
Just about. They called me driver. They never did have my name.
Driver.
All they did was call me driver. It's time to go. The tour manager said, driver, you ready to take us down to the hotel? Yeah, driver, you ready to do this? But that was my first day. So I drove for 3 bands before he promoted me to the office. And that was Jeff Beck. We had Jeff Beck and John McLaughlin's Mahavishnu Orchestra package at the Stanley Theater. So I drove Jeff and his band. And then my other one was Grace Slick and Jefferson Airplane. And after I drove those 3 and I got paid, he actually paid me $50 a day. It was about a 2-week period of those 3 shows. And in the other days, I just went home. And finally, after Grace Slick, he said, you know, you seem like you're doing all right. I said, well, good. I said, I never knew I was going to be a damn driver. He said, well, you want to come in my office and answer the phone? I don't even have a secretary. I said, yeah. And I went in and I started, and then all at once we bought the Stanley in 77 and this was 75. And then, everything started to really change when we bought the Stanley Theater, But those were the early days.
Wow. And so a career was born. Those are just the early days. That's a great story right there. Yeah. Wow. What a start. And you mentioned that when you started, it was a multi-million-dollar industry. And, when you kind of got out of it, it was really a billions-dollar industry. Yep. Before we started here, we were talking, I mentioned the fact that, obviously you promoted a lot of huge concerts, Civic Arena, Mellon Arena, all the different names of the arena, all the different names of the bands that you brought in. It might be easy to assume that your favorite show was a Fleetwood Mac show or a Paul McCartney show, and maybe not the word favorite, but was there a show that was most personally satisfying for you to have booked, or that a show that was one that was just had a big personal impact on you?
Yeah, Rob, those are so hard to answer. Of course, we get that question all the time, Rich and I, and they're great questions because it would be normal, but we did, and not to be, I don't know what to say, but we did so many big shows. You have to imagine at that time, there weren't a lot of other promoters. So every city had their major promoter and they got all the activity. So in Pittsburgh, DiCesare Engler, we got everything. Philadelphia was Electric Factory, and Belkin was up in Cleveland. So that's the way the business worked. So we were so lucky to have literally, just 99% of every great show. So we've seen so many shows, and I guess the ones that come to mind are which are the ones that would personally mean something to us because we like the music or we like them as an individual, because there were plenty that we did had business. Like I could say a couple stadium shows that we did at, Three Rivers or wherever that probably were the best financially for us, but I probably stayed backstage and talked to the stagehands the whole time because I probably didn't like any of the bands out there. You know what I mean? People say to me, oh, you're so lucky. I go, man, there were so many shows that I didn't care for the band, but we were in the business. One thing I teach my kids at Point Park is you leave your opinion at the door. When you're the promoter and you're a buyer, especially, you're the one that has to bring the band in and market it, you're going on research and, et cetera, et cetera. So we did a lot of country acts over my many years that, I wasn't a big country fan, but I sure am glad we did them because they saved our lives here in Pittsburgh, as we now know from all the country shows. But I would say the ones that I always bring up in my top 5, one you mentioned was we had a chance to do Paul McCartney in 90, 91 in that era. We brought him for 2 nights at the Civic Arena, whatever it was called. And, to me, that was special. And for Rich, too, I remember, because we often thought, what would we be doing if it wasn't for the Beatles? We probably wouldn't be a promoter. I probably wouldn't have gotten a band if I didn't see them on Ed Sullivan that night and wanted to play drums like Ringo. I mean, so a lot of that started. So those were very inspirational nights. And the problem you run into is when you're working, see, we don't get to see the show hardly. And you know how that is. I was lucky that we had 2 nights back to back with him. And what's nice about that is I used to what we call settle the shows, as well as everything else in the office, market them. I paid the tour manager or tour accountant. That's called settling. So when do you settle? When the band hits the stage. Because when the band hits the stage, you close your box office, and then you can get your finances together. And then I would go sit with the tour accountant that travels with the show in a little room backstage, close enough to just hear the music, but not see them. And finally, when it's over settling, I'd walk out and the artist would usually say, "Thank you, good night. I hope you liked our show." But when we had 2 nights, I could always watch the first night because I didn't have a real job to do when it's showtime. And then the second night, I would go to work and settle the 2 shows back to back. So we had him for 2 nights. So that was a great one. Any Springsteen show, because I'm a big Springsteen fan. So going back to 1976, which was the first show we ever did at the Syrian Mosque, all the way up to, I left Live Nation in 2007. I believe he's come a couple times afterwards, which I went to see him. But we did probably 10 to 15 shows with Bruce. So I don't care what it was. We had, I'd say probably our 78 concerts, 1978. We had 2 in August, and they came back and did 2 in December at the Stanley Theater. And that's when Bruce would, not that he doesn't do it now, but he would be up on those speakers and he jumped, you know how he was. And then the other one, if I can just get it down to 3, I could sit here all day and tell you about my is probably because we did the last show ever for Bob Marley, who ended up playing with the Wailers at the Stanley, which was our concert, September 23rd, 1980. And he never played again. Of course, he died 8 months later. We've done a lot with the Marley shows and that. So those are inspirational, because they're like, wow, those were magical shows. Not that all the others might not have been, but man, those I never leave me, because every time I hear Three Little Birds or Redemption Song, I think about the day, not so much the show as much as what I was doing backstage, because I was working production. I didn't know that he was as sick as he was. And we took a picture with him after the show. And, it's all those things that go through your head,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those are 3 great shows to talk. And the McCartney show, the first night I was there, and I tell people often that I've seen a lot of great sporting events, Stanley Cup games and concerts throughout my life, but that it was the best night of entertainment of any kind ever in my life was that first McCartney show, and then everything else after that.
You were there the first night of those 2 back in.
Right.
Can I just tell you a quick story about that?
Please.
Okay. So here we are, 2 sellouts with McCartney for about a year in advance. We sold the show out. We were all excited that he was coming. And again, a lot of times you don't get personally excited because, remember, we don't like every band. But that band, you're as excited as yourself buying tickets. Anyways, so we're sitting backstage first night, about 10 to 8. All the craziness of the stagehands walking around, getting ready for the house lights to go down. His manager walks over to Rich and I. We're sitting like on a road case, and he walks up and he goes, "Have you guys ever had to cancel a show once everybody's in the house?" That's not a good question, 10 to 8.
No.
We turned to him, we go, "Why?" He goes, "Well, Paul's got a little bit of a sore throat. But," he said, "your production manager already has your house doctor backstage." We didn't even know that. "And Paul's going to see if he can still come out and do it." Okay. So in those next 10 minutes, we talked to the general manager at the venue. We called everybody because we wanted to see if he was going to cancel. Were they other dates so we could reschedule real soon, yada, yada. They had hockey. It was just going to be a mess. So about 10 minutes later, he walks up to it. His manager was very casual about it. He walks up and he's looking around and we're looking at him. He goes, well, he's going to give it a shot. We go, well, good. Could you say that a little quicker? And he did. And, you know, I think the first song, maybe, I think it was Figure of Eight. And that was a little bit of a stretch. But the band members backstage prior to going up said, listen, it's going to be fine. His voice gets better as the show goes on. It like opens up his throat or something. The next day we had a real doctor's appointment and he was all fine. But again, you know, that was one. And then here's the other story. The manager said to us, do you guys want to meet Paul tomorrow night? And every night for a big concert that we sold out, whether it be at a Civic Arena or Stanley, we would get a plaque that would be very designed just for the band with their logo. Thanks for making this a celebration, the date, how many tickets, et cetera. And we said, well, yeah, we'd love to give one to Paul. We have one made. They said, okay, no problem. So the next night comes, you know, and you're nervous as anybody because you're going to go back and meet him, right? So me, Rich, and my plaque, we're going back, and the guy goes, you ready to meet Paul? I said, just in that statement, our legs started to, like, you know, shaky. So he said, I'll tell you what. He said, you don't need a photographer. We've got a house photographer. I'm going to introduce you to Paul, and then I'm going to have the guy take your picture, and then I'm going to leave with the photographer, and the three of you can talk for 5 minutes right before he goes on. And I knew that I wasn't going to say anything because I was going to let him do all the talking because I had no idea what I was going to say. So anyways, we go backstage and the guy does his introduction and Paul's really super nice. All that stuff that you hear on interviews when he does Stern and everything. I mean, the guy's the nicest. It was 5 minutes, but it was nice. Anyways, he said, I love Pittsburgh. And he went on and on. And ironically, at that time in the 90s, Nintendo and Game Boys were very big, if you remember those games.
Yeah.
There was something called a Nintendo Festival that was going around the country that was being produced by a bunch of rock people, which was basically a Thursday through Sunday festival at a convention center style where the kids would come in and play Nintendo and then they would win. And then on Sunday, the grand prize winner would eventually go to Florida and play all the other states that did it and cities. Well, Paul had a friend in New York who was producing one. And he says, and he's a very big promoter and he's a rock promoter. He goes, by the way, are you guys doing Nintendo Festival? And we said, ironically, we are doing it. Yeah, we bought into it. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. So he starts telling us how much he likes Nintendo and that his kids are on the road and they love Game Boy. And then he turns to Rich and I and he says, what game do you guys like? I didn't know anything. I mean, I knew about Game Boy because my kids were about his age kids. I said, if 18,000 people out there knew that we were talking about Nintendo and Game Boy, 2 minutes before he goes on stage, they would freak out. The tour manager yells down the hall, Paul, you got 30 seconds. He goes, I'll be right with you. Anyways, what I like about it, he starts telling us, he said, Paul, the intro tape's on. He goes, I'll be there. He says, okay, guys, I got to go to work. And he goes and he leaves us. I mean, it was the best talk, you know, I mean, in its own way, you know what I mean? It was so down to earth, you know.
I think that's what you really wind up hoping for.
Right.
A couple of times that I've had the pleasure of meeting some folks that I really wanted to talk to. We talked really anything but about what they're really known for, and that was what made it enjoyable.
That's right. That's right.
So 2 more questions for you, and then I want to ask you about what you're doing at Point Park there. You talked a little bit, somebody told me, I had a bird tell me that you have a lot of memorabilia you've collected over the years. Is there something that, a certain piece that is maybe the most meaningful to you that you really just, you know, cherish the most?
You know, once again, it's a kind of hard thing. You know, one thing I was fortunate was, and it wasn't like I was just trying to collect everything I could, but what I did create was a lot of these pictures that we took, you know, really didn't seem like a big deal back in the day. But then when I did my basement and I put, I mean, I have tons of them, but I couldn't put them all out, 30, 40 pictures with me and Rich, with everybody. I mean, just all the ones we're talking about, those are the special things. I mean, I have autographed things that, you know, we've gotten all that, but it's just having the pictures, you know, and like, I have a picture that we took with Bob Marley that night. And so, you know, when I go down in my basement and watch TV or play my drums or whatever, and I look over and I see that picture, I'm thinking, it just, boom, it comes back. It's nothing about ego. It's just that I remember that night by way of that picture, because I remember when we went upstairs to take it, and, you know, I didn't know that he was as sick as he was, but you couldn't tell from the picture. I see the one with me, Rich, and McCartney over there, and I think of Nintendo. I loved Kansas, was one of our favorite bands in Pittsburgh. We have so many pictures with Kansas, and they were so nice. And if, you know, just on and on. So I would say it's probably the pictures with the bands that we had a chance to take, especially in that era, because many of them, whether it be Rodney Dangerfield or whether it be Frank Zappa, you know, they're all past. And it's sad when you look at them, but when I see me and Rich sitting on a couch with Frank Zappa sitting there and he's holding his plaque, I'm thinking, but I was probably 25 at the time. It was a really great night, you know, and I mean, why did I get a chance to do that? How lucky was I? You know, why? I don't know, you know.
Fantastic. I love the context. These are great. Your answers are very insightful and really put a lot of context into what we as fans hear on the other side. And they're talking about, you know, Paul McCartney talking about Game Boy 30 seconds and wanting to finish that conversation. That's priceless.
Yeah.
But I guess the last question I wanted to ask kind of wraps into, it's actually a two-pronged question, and it really has more to do with what you're doing now. You know, you are now the associate professor. Do I have it right? The associate professor of communication.
I dropped the associate. I became a
Okay.
true professional and professor about 2 years ago. I finally got my MBA, and I had to go back to get an MBA at 55. So
Wow.
I
Congrats.
I left Live Nation in 2007 at the age of 55, thinking, what else am I going to do? Anyways, through a series of students who were interns for me over there, I found out that Point Park University had a program that had an entertainment management part of it, entertainment business, which is exactly what I wanted to go to when I was in college. And I thought, wow, I knew there were a few schools like Belmont down in Nashville and USC that have music programs, but not very many. So somebody prior to me coming there started what they call sports, arts, and entertainment management. And I had an interview, and it's been about 13 years now. So we have about 9 classes that are all geared towards people who want to do what I did, men and women, both. In fact, probably the majority of our students are female, but they have a passion for music. I don't care that you can play guitar, drums, or, you know, sing. I'm teaching you, and we're teaching you the business side, so you can work for Live Nation, and you can work for AEG, and you can work for PPG Paints Arena and produce concerts. It's the business side, so it's been fun. I've enjoyed it because to me it's not like teaching, because I mean I do it naturally. I did have to learn how to do syllabus and give tests and all that, but I always look back at Rich and Pat. Both of them taught me everything that I could ever teach the kids. And a lot of other universities now are starting to come up with entertainment programs. I don't know where, you know, now we're going through some strange times because of what's going on in the sports industry and the arts and the entertainment, because we're going to be the last part to go back. But I think, like, you know, we were talking before we started, a lot of things are starting to change. A lot of things that we didn't really push ourselves to do in this industry via the internet and the Zooms and the concerts, we're now going to do because we've done them. And I think even when we do get back to some form of normalcy, you'll see a lot of those things will still go on. So I think we're going to start having to figure out how can we help teach that a little bit differently so that our students will be more tuned into working for somebody and making that happen, you know?
Yeah. So the last question I want to ask, and given just everything you just said there, who should be contacting you? It's not just, you know, I get the sense that your students aren't necessarily the 18 to 23. There might be some of those in the class, but, you know, who should be contacting you and looking into this? And when does, you know, given what's happened, you know, from your very, you've got the expertise of seeing the industry from the inside, when do you think live music gets back to, is there a normal again for live music? How long does that take?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking like everybody else is reading. I'm trying to read everything I can on it. Two of my sons are in the business. One's in Nashville, one's in Raleigh. So I'm a little closer because I hear through them what they're getting. But I think the smaller things that can maybe start up sooner than later. But it looks like the Live Nation business people are looking at that, next year, because the summer is probably going to come and go. You might be able to do something in an amphitheater if you cut the capacity way down. And that's the problem. They're being asked to reduce their capacities for the distancing. And then you have to try to make the numbers work. So the bands are going to have to reduce their guarantees because people aren't going to want to pay any more. They're going to want to pay less probably for a ticket because they're out of work. So it all has to come together. And that's what's being done in the trenches of Live Nation and LA. They're all doing these talks so that hopefully they'll get rescheduled and we'll be able to start back again, certainly next year with the bigger shows. But I think you see these drive-ins are being talked about and, all the things that we all hear, all waiting to see how they can use it. But the big things is, how do we set up the venue? How do we distance everybody there? How do they get checked? How do they use the restrooms? How do they use the concession stands without interfering? And then once all of that is completed, how do we know that the bands are convinced that they can travel 12 people to a tour bus and stay in a hotel that they don't know is going to be as clean as they want? So it's kind of a dilemma on both sides. And we'll just have to take one step at a time. It will happen, but it'll have to happen slow. And people have to live with watching concerts on, YouTube and Zoom right now, best they can.
So somebody out there watching this that isn't your typical, I shouldn't use the word typical, but your traditional college student who's, that 18 to 23, somebody older than that, somebody that's working somewhere, some other industry, they should still be checking into, maybe if this is something they thought about, because now may be the time to do it, because, when things come back next year. So who should be talking to you?
Yeah, that's a good point. And well, you're right. Number one, as you said, a lot of high school kids who are looking to, move on to the next level. Those are the people that are our primary people, because of course they're graduating and they want to, most of these high school students, they just, like I say, a lot of them have a passion for music. It's unbelievable how much passion's out there, but they don't play. And see, prior to having schools and programs like ours, they didn't know what to do. They didn't even know there would be something they could do. I got lucky because I just was keep driving and I met Rich and, that was it. But if you don't know that, you don't know that. So we do I go to a lot of high schools on, volunteers to talk to kids, because a lot of high schools have sports and entertainment as a major class now at their high schools. And you get someone to come in like myself or somebody from our sports departments, say, hey, there is a program after high school. Now, they know that sports has all kinds of sports management and sports marketing. It's the arts and entertainment that they don't know. So we get a lot of those kids to teach them, again, how they're going to work in the business. You don't have to be a player. And then there's a lot of people that, like you just said, that maybe graduated and they didn't really like what they graduated for. They don't like their job. I get a lot of them that are coming back for our MBA program primarily, because we have an MBA program also in sports, arts, and entertainment. And I see a lot of people who work in banks and work in all these places, and they go, maybe it's just not something I want to do. My passion's over here. And so we just try to get we're trying to get people matched up with the passion to be the job. That's the ultimate for all of us. I don't care if you are a fireman or you work in a bank. If it's a passion and you're lucky, not everybody's that lucky. We're trying to make it work just for our little field. That's all.
Well, certainly it sounds like some groundbreaking work you're doing in the area of education and entertainment, arts and entertainment. As you said, other schools are starting to look into doing some similar things. And of course, your insight in the context on the music industry and past shows and your own personal experiences. I think anybody watching and listening is going to enjoy hearing what you had to say. We could probably, I know I could go on for hours and hours and hours, but we've all got things to do, I'm sure. So I want to thank you, Ed, for your time. And any guests that I have on, I always like to give them one last opportunity to talk about whatever they want. Anything else that we haven't covered you want to say, or
No,
parting
not really.
shots?
No, the Point Park thing I appreciate because, you know, we're there. If anybody's interested, they can always just contact the university and they'll get up to me. But also just, you know, if people, I appreciate all the people that love music, you know, and I'm the same way as everybody else. And all the promoters that are out there basically are just great music fans. And all we did was we just got into the business side, whether you're working, you know, on the clubs we have here with all the different guys that are doing the shows, you know, at Gray Area and Brian Drusky and just live. There are all so many great people. They're the people that are passionate and trying to make the numbers work. And they're just going to, you know, we hope that people can continue to go because financially it's not easy. People think the promoters are making a lot of money even before this pandemic. It's not that because the artists are usually one-sided. They're making most. So our break evens are unbelievable. But if you're passionate, I used to have a friend of mine who's in the finance business. When I would tell him what we spend and what we make, why do you do that? Why don't you just go to the Meadows and somewhere? If you want to just go and blow your money, they said, that's not a good business model. Well, it isn't, but it's passion that people want to be in front of the musicians and be there. And we made it our business. And then if you were lucky enough to own some venues, and that's where Live Nation came along, then you owned the real estate, then that becomes a little different, you know. So tell people just hopefully keep on going to shows. That's all.
Yeah, well, we all want to get out there. We can't wait to do so. We thank you again for all the great memories that you and DiCesare Engler gave us over the years. And thank you very much. I'll let you go. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you. You too.